July 30th, 2025 will go down as one of the most terrifying days in modern Chinese history. What started as routine typhoon preparations quickly spiraled into an unthinkable nightmare when nature decided to unleash not one, but two catastrophic disasters simultaneously. While emergency crews were battling Typhoon Komai's destructive winds along China's eastern coast, an enormous 8.8 magnitude earthquake struck thousands of kilometers away in Russia, sending tsunami waves racing across the Pacific directly toward the same regions already under siege. This wasn't just bad timing. This was a perfect storm of chaos that would test every limit of China's disaster response capabilities and leave millions wondering if anywhere was truly safe. Typhoon Komai pulled off something meteorologists rarely witness: a devastating double landfall that caught authorities completely off guard. At exactly 4:30 in the morning, the storm slammed into Zhejiang Island in Zhoushan City with winds reaching 82 kilometers per hour, turning the pre-dawn darkness into absolute mayhem. Residents were jolted awake by the sound of shattering windows and roaring water as torrential rains began breaking rainfall records that had stood for decades. But Komai wasn't finished. After terrorizing Zhejiang Province throughout the day, the relentless typhoon made a shocking second landfall at 4:30 in the afternoon in Shanghai's Fengxian district, something that happens so rarely that many longtime residents had never experienced a direct typhoon hit in their lifetimes. The storm brought with it over 370 millimeters of rainfall in just 24 hours. Enough water to submerge entire neighborhoods and transform busy city streets into dangerous rivers. Emergency shelters in Zhoushan were overwhelmed as families fled their homes, clutching whatever belongings they could carry while firefighters worked desperately to pump water from flooded streets. The port city, known for its bustling maritime industry, became a ghost town as waves crashed over sea walls and storage containers were swept away like toys. What made this disaster particularly brutal was the typhoon's unpredictable behavior. Meteorologists had tracked it weakening over the Philippines, only to watch in horror as it regained strength over the South China Sea and delivered two crushing blows to China's most populated regions. The morning landfall in Zhoushan was just the beginning of a day that would redefine what Chinese emergency officials thought they knew about natural disaster preparedness. When Komai set its sights on Shanghai, China's financial powerhouse with over 24 million residents, the scale of the evacuation became absolutely staggering. In less than 12 hours, authorities managed to relocate 282,800 people from vulnerable coastal and low-lying areas, a logistical nightmare that required setting up more than 1,900 emergency shelters across the sprawling metropolis. Picture this: nearly 300,000 people, equivalent to the entire population of a major city, suddenly forced to abandon their homes and businesses as walls of water approached. The transportation system that millions depend on daily completely collapsed under the typhoon's assault. Shanghai's two major airports, Pudong and Hangzhou, became graveyards of cancelled dreams as 640 flights were scrapped, 410 at Pudong International and 230 at Hangzhou. Thousands of passengers found themselves stranded, watching helplessly as departure boards turned red with cancellation after cancellation. The city's entire ferry network, a lifeline for countless commuters, shut down completely by 7 o'clock in the morning, leaving waterfront communities isolated. Highway speeds were slashed to just 60 kilometers per hour, turning normally bustling expressways into slow-motion rivers of frustrated drivers. Even the extensive metro system, usually Shanghai's most reliable transport option, struggled to maintain normal operations as water began seeping into stations. Construction sites across the city went silent as work was suspended at over 4,600 locations, creating an eerie atmosphere in a metropolis that never sleeps. The Shanghai Central Meteorological Observatory escalated their rainstorm warning from yellow to orange, the second highest alert level, as the reality set in that this wasn't going to be just another routine weather event. While hundreds of thousands of Shanghai residents were fleeing their homes and the city's infrastructure crumbled around them, two of the world's most famous theme parks made a decision that left the internet absolutely stunned. Shanghai Disneyland and the newly opened Legoland Shanghai chose to keep their gates open, welcoming guests even as typhoon winds howled outside and emergency sirens wailed across the city. The contrast was surreal, families evacuating nearby neighborhoods while others lined up for roller coasters just kilometers away. Disney officials defended their choice by citing strict weather monitoring protocols and enhanced safety measures, but social media erupted with a mixture of disbelief and dark humor. One viral post captured the absurdity perfectly: "If the ocean rises just a bit more, Mickey's going swimming." Critics slammed the decision as recklessly prioritizing profits over public safety, questioning how theme parks could justify staying open when the entire city was under siege. Legoland attempted damage control by suspending outdoor rides and shows while keeping indoor attractions running, but the optics remained terrible. Images of rain-soaked guests in plastic ponchos trudging through flooded pathways while emergency responders worked frantically nearby became symbols of corporate tone deafness. The park's decision highlighted a bizarre disconnect between commercial interests and crisis reality. While government officials coordinated the largest evacuation in Shanghai's recent history, entertainment companies were essentially telling people to come have fun in a disaster zone. What made the situation even more controversial was the timing, as Disney had recently implemented new policies for extreme heat management, showing they clearly understood weather-related safety concerns. The choice to remain open during a typhoon while simultaneously evacuating nearly 300,000 people created a public relations nightmare that overshadowed any potential revenue gains from the handful of brave souls willing to visit theme parks during a natural disaster. Just as Chinese emergency officials thought they had their hands full with Typhoon Komei's destruction, Mother Nature decided to unleash her ultimate one-two punch. At approximately 11:25 in the morning local time, the Earth itself began to tremble 4,000 kilometers away off Russia's remote Kamchatka Peninsula as a colossal 8.8 magnitude earthquake, one of the strongest ever recorded, ripped through the ocean floor. This wasn't just any earthquake. It was tied for the sixth most powerful tremor in modern history, releasing energy equivalent to thousands of atomic bombs and instantly transforming what was already a regional crisis into a potential Pacific-wide catastrophe. Within minutes of the massive quake, China's National Marine Forecasting Center issued urgent tsunami alerts for the entire eastern seaboard, warning that deadly waves up to 1 meter high could reach Shanghai and other coastal cities by early evening. The timing couldn't have been more devastating. Emergency crews who were already stretched beyond their limits dealing with typhoon evacuations suddenly found themselves racing against time to prepare for an entirely different type of disaster. Tsunami waves move at terrifying speeds across ocean basins, often reaching 500 kilometers per hour in deep water, giving coastal communities mere hours to prepare for impact. Unlike typhoons that can be tracked for days, tsunamis offer virtually no warning time once they're generated, making them one of nature's most feared killers. The psychological impact on millions of Chinese residents was immediate and profound. People who had just fled typhoon flooding were now being told to brace for potentially massive ocean waves. Emergency shelters that were already overcrowded with typhoon evacuees suddenly had to accommodate even more displaced residents, creating logistical nightmares for disaster coordinators. The earthquake's epicenter near Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky meant the tsunami would traverse the entire Pacific, potentially affecting coastlines from Japan to California, but China's eastern cities were directly in the path of the initial wavefront. Russian authorities reported immediate devastation in the sparsely populated Kamchatka region, with the port town of Severokurilsk being flooded by tsunami waves and nearly 300 people requiring emergency evacuation. What made this situation particularly terrifying was the compound nature of the threat. Coastal areas already battered by typhoon storm surge now faced the prospect of tsunami waves that could amplify the destruction exponentially. As both disasters converged on China's eastern provinces, the scale of destruction began reaching truly historic proportions that meteorologists and seismologists are still struggling to comprehend. The rainfall totals alone were staggering. Ningbo recorded over 370 millimeters of precipitation in just 24 hours, while the city of Lishe shattered its annual rainfall record in a single day, receiving more water than it typically sees in an entire year. These weren't just numbers on a weather station. They represented the complete transformation of urban landscapes into apocalyptic flood zones where cars floated like bathtubs and first floors of buildings became underwater dungeons. In one particularly heartbreaking scene captured on social media, a car dealership employee stood among dozens of submerged vehicles, tears streaming down his face as he described never witnessing hail and flooding of this magnitude in his entire life working in Zhejiang Province. The emotional toll was as devastating as the physical damage, with families watching decades of hard work disappear beneath murky floodwaters in a matter of hours. Ningbo streets transformed into treacherous rivers where residents were forced to wade through ankle-deep water just to reach safety, while emergency responders struggled to navigate their rescue vehicles through intersections that had become temporary lakes. The compound effect of typhoon winds and record rainfall created a perfect storm of infrastructure failure. Power lines snapped under the weight of waterlogged trees, plunging entire districts into darkness just as residents needed electricity most for emergency communications. Construction equipment worth millions of dollars was scattered like toys across industrial sites, while shipping containers that weighed several tons were picked up and deposited kilometers from their original locations. What made the destruction particularly cruel was its indiscriminate nature. Luxury high-rises and humble family homes suffered equally as the floodwaters rose, proving that money couldn't buy protection from nature's fury. Emergency services reported unprecedented demand for rescues, with helicopter crews working around the clock to pluck stranded residents from rooftops and balconies as the water continued rising. The economic impact was immediate and crushing. Businesses that had survived decades of challenges were wiped out in hours, while farmers watched entire crop seasons disappear beneath the raging torrents. Perhaps most chilling of all were the reports from residents describing the sound of the approaching disaster. A low, continuous roar that grew louder and more ominous as the walls of water advanced through their neighborhoods, giving them just minutes to grab essential belongings and flee to higher ground. What happened on July 30th was not just an isolated weather event, it was a terrifying glimpse into humanity's climate-altered future, where multiple extreme disasters can strike at the same time with consequences our current infrastructure was never built to handle. While Shanghai and Zhejiang were still pumping water from flooded streets and searching for the missing, reports began to pour in from northern China, revealing an even more sinister pattern of destruction. In Beijing and the surrounding provinces, heavy rainfall had already claimed more than 30 lives in the days leading up to Koumei's landfall, forcing authorities to evacuate tens of thousands of residents from areas prone to landslides and flash flooding. The connection was no coincidence. Meteorologists confirmed that Koumei's circulation had indirectly influenced weather systems across huge swaths of China, setting off a chain reaction of extreme events that pushed the nation's emergency response capacity past the breaking point. Chen Tao, chief forecaster at the National Meteorological Center, delivered a chilling assessment to disaster preparedness experts worldwide. Typhoons like Koumei may not top the charts for raw wind speed, but their slow movement and lingering effects are creating new categories of devastation that traditional forecast models cannot predict. Because the storm stalled after landfall, periods of intense rainfall lasted far longer than expected, piling up totals that smashed historical records by staggering margins. This marks a fundamental shift in the behavior of extreme weather. Instead of fast-moving tempests that blow through quickly, climate change is spawning slower disasters that hover over populated areas like malevolent spirits, wringing every last drop of moisture onto the communities below. The Yangtze River experienced its first numbered flood event of 2025, and red-level geological disaster alerts were issued across multiple provinces as waterlogged mountainsides grew increasingly unstable. Emergency managers found themselves coordinating responses faster than they could deploy resources, with rescue teams barely completing one evacuation before being summoned to fresh floods dozens of kilometers away. The psychological toll was deep and lasting. Residents who had survived earlier typhoons said Koumei felt fundamentally different, more unpredictable and vengeful than anything they had known. Social media filled with videos of people standing in the ruins of their homes, not crying or shouting but staring in numbed silence at nature's incomprehensible fury. Insurers began preliminary damage assessments that will ultimately run into the billions of yuan, yet the true cost cannot be measured in currency. It is the dawning realization that the stable climate patterns on which human civilization was built are dissolving into chaos, and no amount of technology or planning can provide full protection against compound climate disasters. July 30th, 2025 now stands as a watershed moment that will forever reshape how coastal megacities prepare for an increasingly hostile climate. The collision of Typhoon Koumei and the Russian earthquake tsunami was not a freak coincidence. It was a preview of the multi-hazard disasters climate scientists have warned about for decades, where failures cascade from one system into catastrophic breakdowns across an entire region. Shanghai's experience, evacuating almost 300,000 people while simultaneously bracing for tsunami impact, exposed critical gaps in disaster response protocols that other global cities ignore at their peril. The most disturbing lesson was not the raw power of any single storm, but how quickly modern urban infrastructure can crumble when attacked from multiple directions at once. Carefully mapped evacuation routes became death traps when submerged, backup communication networks failed under simultaneous demand, and shelters designed for a single hazard could not absorb the massive influx of people escaping several threats at once. The economic shockwaves reached far beyond immediate rebuilding costs. International supply chains dependent on Chinese manufacturing hubs felt instant disruptions that rippled through markets worldwide, proving that extreme weather in one locale can jolt commerce across the planet. Even more ominous, the combination of record-shattering rainfall and seismic tsunami risk represents a new category of threat that existing building codes and urban planning frameworks were never meant to withstand. From Miami to Mumbai, coastal cities are urgently re-evaluating their vulnerability to similar compound disasters, recognizing that preparedness plans focused on one hazard at a time are dangerously outdated. The question keeping climate scientists awake is no longer whether another day like July 30th will come, but how much worse it will be as global temperatures keep rising and weather systems grow ever more chaotic. As the people of Shanghai and Zhejiang begin the long task of rebuilding, they do so knowing this may be the new normal. Every typhoon season could bring unprecedented devastation, and every earthquake might set off cascading emergencies across nations. The age of predictable, manageable natural disasters is ending, and human survival will depend on our ability to adapt to relentless chaos.